It is the duty of those who are truly conscious to teach those who are not. Presently, those black people who insist that we're no longer being oppressed always think that they're the smartest ones in the room. But the truth is they're the most misinformed ones in the room. They always present the fact that we now have black celebrities that are millionaires. And they use that fact as their validation that we're no longer being oppressed. But the truth is that those black millionaire celebrities makes up less than 1% of the African American population, and even less a percentage when compared to the black global population. Therefore, if you're using black celebrity millionaires as evidence that we're no longer being oppressed by what oppressive forces, then you're ignorant of your own ignorance. Those black people who are now insisting that we're no longer being oppressed are in fact gullible, naive, and ignorant of our true reality. Throughout history, those empires that were profoundly racist and extremely oppressive did not give up those proclivities very easily. They instead merely abandoned those blatant racist oppressive tactics and have developed more covert methods that allow them to continue oppressing the oppressed population, methods that are not as easily recognized by the victims. When the victimized population no longer recognizes the oppression tactics, this allows the oppressor to continue oppressing them without any resistance. This is the true hidden reality that presently confronts black people living under white oppression. Because many of us no longer recognize the current oppressive tactics that are currently being deployed against us. Therefore, many of us naively insist that we're no longer being oppressed. But that insistence comes from a place of ignorance. Because the absolute true fact is that although black people no longer experience the same type of blatant white racist oppressive tactics as our grandparents had experienced them, we are, however, still being oppressed by white oppressive forces. When those blatant white racist subjugation and oppression tactics used in the past against the black population had become no longer socially acceptable with the changing times and had resulted in unprecedented unified black protests, the white oppressors did not abandon those subjugation practices. They instead merely abandoned those blatant tactics and developed more covert methods for continuing their subjugation of the black population. The white oppressors' subjugation of black people always works best when the black victims no longer recognizes the tactics. These modern tactics are covert and are very sophisticated. So much more, in fact, that the comparison can be made that the earliest subjugation tactics used up until the 1960s had a GED, while today's method has a PhD. It's that much more sophisticated. Unlike the blatant racist Jim Crow methods that black people could easily identify and therefore unify ourselves against, today's methods are not easily recognized, nor are they easily comprehended by most of the black victims. This provides the white oppressors with their most effective system used for subjugating black people. It's so effective that it allows the white oppressors to continue subjugating the black masses, while simultaneously misleading the black masses to perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies. Therefore, rather than unifying ourselves to overcome these modern subjugation tactics, many of us instead fight among ourselves, blames ourselves, and while defending our oppressors. Therefore, white oppressive forces now subjugates the black population without any black resistance. As I said, the subjugation of black people always works best when the black victims no longer recognize how it works. This was done to us because of, in 1968, white social scientists hired by the Kerner Commission to thoroughly study the African American population to determine the reason for that decade's unprecedented unified black protests. They determined that there were two core aggravating factors. One was blatant white racism and an elevated unifying black collective self-esteem brought on by that decade's Black Pride movement. These findings resulted in white oppressive forces developing covert white racist subjugation tactics and deploying propaganda campaigns that keeps the collective self-esteem of the black masses very low by keeping us believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves. This is a system that currently being deployed against us. Black people's unawareness of these modern subjugation tactics provides the white oppressors with their greatest weapon against us. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach. African proverb. In the book, The Art of War, its author Sun Tzu, a Chinese general military strategist, wrote that to win any battle, you must first thoroughly study the tactics of your enemy and then develop counter strategies to overcome those tactics. Likewise, in order for black people to liberate ourselves, we must first learn of these many covert subjugation tactics that white oppressive forces presently deploys against us. These modern racist subjugation tactics being deployed against us are as followed. 1. Demoralize, divide, and rule. 2. Manufactured consent to mistreat. 3. Gaslighting, psychological warfare. 4. The socializing of black people to adhere to white dominance. Let's begin with the first one. Demoralize, divide, and rule. Demoralize, divide, and rule is a method of maintaining control over a large targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. This is precisely what's being done to the black population by the white propagandists. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of the black population that amplifies the negative to the point where it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It is actually a black racially demoralizing, divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. It's why everything they tell us about ourselves are negative. This psychological warfare program is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects the black population to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this psychological warfare system, fraudulent, black racially demoralizing, and black racially devaluing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the black population without being challenged nor counterbalanced by an equal amount of black positive, racially affirming information. Its constant daily assault of deplorable negative depictions about the black population are designed to corrupt our sense of black racial unity, our cohesion, mold the character of self-hatred, and it creates self-doubt and self-loathing and division among us. And most particularly, it keeps our self-esteem very low. It also covertly conditions many of us to believe that there's something wrong with us and that we therefore need the white society to govern over our lives. Therefore, it makes many of us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. And it insinuates that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. It's the true reason why many black people now favorably perceive whites in spite of brutal history to the contrary. Its ultimate goal is to demoralize the black population to such an extent that we think that we need the white society to govern over our lives, and then we abandon all hopes of liberating ourselves. It's also designed to instill the myth of white racial superiority into our collective subconscious minds. It's why we speak negatively of ourselves while speaking favorably of our oppressors. Doing so not only makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it makes many of us even prefer it. This psychological warfare system also shifts black collective aggressions away from the white oppressive society and redirects it against ourselves. This system is extremely effective because when black people are constantly inundated with propaganda from trusted white media sources, telling us the fraudulent worst possible narratives about ourselves, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. No group can be constantly subjected to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about themselves and not be negatively impacted. It's not possible. This is what's being done to us. This psychological warfare system is the true core reason why many Black people are now self-loathing, perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres our oppressors in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. It also produces a profound feeling of self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. The problem has never been a silly slave syndrome myth. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent, worst possible narratives about themselves. That's a quote from Frantz Fanon. It's a true reality. The second tactic on the list is called manufactured consent to mistreat. The success of the 1960s civil rights movement was greatly due to the national and global support that was attained by Dr. King's nonviolent strategies. The global responses in support of African Americans were immense. It eroded the U.S. government's global image and standing. African Americans were favorably perceived by millions of people around the world as being a dignified people pursuing an equality that we should have been born with. Dr. King was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. These global responses in support of African Americans totally embarrassed the U.S. government. White oppressive forces realized then that to continue their subjugation of African Americans as a means of maintaining their white social dominance, it had become necessary to create societal consent to do so. They therefore deployed a propaganda campaign called manufactured consent to mistreat. Manufactured consent to mistreat is when the oppressors creates media propaganda that falsely vilifies and criminalizes the image of the oppressed in order to create consensual national and global setting that falsely justifies the oppressor's mistreatment of the oppressed. It's an old Nazi propaganda tactic that was also used in Germany against the Jews. This propaganda campaign was presently being deployed against the African American population. Through lies and manufactured news reports, Black people in the U.S. are being portrayed as a major problem of the white society. More specifically, Black people are being made to appear as being the most unethical group, thereby creating a false impression of wanton Black criminality and violence. These deplorable depictions create a shifting of victimization in behalf of whites, and it lessens pressure for social change in behalf of Blacks. Moreover, they create prejudice, distorted perceptions, and beliefs about the Black population that are designed to make the nation and the entire world insensitive to our plight. They also create contemptuous feelings about the Black population. They make those feelings appear to be justified. When contempt of Black people is made to appear to be justified, this creates conditioned responses within the nation that allows eventualities to unfold against the Black population without any opposition or resentment. It creates a consensual national setting of where in which Black people are disproportionately incarcerated, given stiffer sentences, and are more likely than any other racial group to be treated brutally by the police officers. It's also the reason why white cops can routinely kill unarmed innocent Black people and avoid prosecution by merely saying that they were in fear of losing their lives. The third tactic is called gaslighting psychological warfare. The term gaslighting is usually associated with individual abusive relationships, wherein which one person is mentally abused for the benefit of the other. However, the white establishment uses that same gaslighting tactic to mentally abuse the black population. Black people are the unknowing victims within a psychological abusive relationship with a narcissistic white society that gaslights us unrelentingly. Within this gaslighting scenario, the protests and grievances of the black population are never acknowledged nor legitimized by the white society. The white oppressors instead always presents counter narratives that deflects attention away from the black protests. Through this practice, information is always twisted, spun, and or is selectively omitted to always favor the oppressors. This practice is continued until the black protesters begin to doubt the merit of our own protest, and then eventually we stop protesting, having gained no grounds on the issue. This gaslighting warfare strategy allows the white establishment to, rather than addressing the grievances of the black population, to merely instead divert and distract from the protests. Case, point, and proof. Remember when Colin Kaepernick kneeled in silent protest against the routine killing of innocent unarmed black people by white cops? The white establishment responded by labeling him as being unpatriotic. That response was actually a gaslighting distraction tactic that the oppressors used to deflect the protests of the oppressed. This is how the white establishment subdued the kneeling protests by black athletes without ever addressing the issue. They just kept deflecting from it until the black athletes became mentally fatigued and stopped protesting. While the issue of white cops routinely killing black people was never resolved, but it has mentally fatigued us. The All Lives Matters slogan is also a gaslighting response. All Lives Matters has never been the ideology held by the white society. That statement is now merely being used as a counter narrative that deflects against the black population's declaration that Black Lives Matters. It's intentionally designed to diffuse the moral statement of Black Lives Matters, while diverting attention away from the issue of white cops routinely killing innocent, unarmed black people. This is how the white society subdued it without ever addressing it. Within this psychological warfare system, the white establishment is never acknowledged as morally wrong, and the black oppressed are never acknowledged as morally correct. The white society instead continues creating false counter-narratives that deflects from the black protests. This is continued until many black protesters begin to doubt the reason for protesting, thinking that if our cause isn't being recognized by the white dominant society, then perhaps it lacks merit. The minds of targeted populations are quite easy to manipulate if you're unaware of what's actually being done to them. Once minds have been confused, manipulation becomes simple. The mind will even then ignore common sense, and rationality falls away, even overlooking hypocrisy and deception. And number 4, last but not least, black people are being socialized to adhere to white dominance during our entire educational development. The white educational system's failure to adequately provide black students with a racially affirming curriculum, as it routinely does so for white students, is actually essential for maintaining white social dominance. Because for a ruling class to maintain its position of social dominance over its oppressed population, they must condition the oppressed from a very early age to accept their own subordinate status and to adhere to the authority of the dominant culture. To do so, the education given to the oppressed from the time that their minds are young and very impressionable must be the type that denies them of a racially affirming education. When the oppressed population are denied of a racially affirming education, this conditions them to perceive themselves through a false inherent subordinate identity that makes them more accepting of their subordinate status within a society dominated by their oppressors. This is the true reason why we learn more Black racially affirming stuff from each other than we do so from within our white governed schools. During our education development, we are being conditioned to accept white dominance over our lives. The reason why you're hearing all this stuff from a random guy a random brother on social media, because you don't have Black leaders anymore. Our Black leaders have been replaced. They assassinated our true leaders and replaced them with Black puppets. These Black puppets worked in behalf of the white establishment. These Black organizations are now 501c3. They get their tax exempt through the government. So if they embark on any type of objectives that are against the interest of the white government can take away their tax exempt status. That's how they control them. So we don't have real leaders anymore. We have puppets. Now you know the truth of our plight and condition. Those of us who insist that we're no longer being oppressed does so because you are ignorant of your own ignorance. A speaker of truth has no friends. One love and peace, brothers and sisters. It's time to wake up and see our reality.